What if the most dangerous predator in the galaxy had never encountered something as simple as a genuine compliment? What if humanity's greatest weapon wasn't our technology, our strength, or our cunning, but our ability to see beauty where others see only terror? Captain Sarah Chun thought she was about to die when the sanguine Empress materialized on her ship's bridge, fangs gleaming and eyes burning with ancient hunger. Instead, she found herself blurting out the most honest thing she'd ever said. "Your eyes are absolutely stunning." The reaction that followed would reshape the fate of two species and prove that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe isn't fear or hatred. It's unexpected kindness in the face of certain death. This is the story of how a panicked human's genuine compliment to an alien vampire changed the course of an intergalactic war and revealed truths about both species that neither had dared to imagine. Captain Sarah Chun had always believed that death would come with warning. Perhaps a blaring alarm, the screech of tearing metal, or at least the courtesy of a few final moments to compose herself. She never imagined it would arrive in complete silence, materializing like smoke on the bridge of her research vessel while she was reviewing mineral composition reports from the Kepler 442 system. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in seconds. The lights flickered, not from any electrical malfunction, but as if the very presence of this being drained energy from the surrounding space. Sarah's breath misted as she looked up from her tablet, and her heart stopped entirely when she saw what stood before her. The creature was tall, easily 7 feet, with skin the color of fresh snow touched by moonlight. But it was the eyes that captured Sarah's attention completely. Swirling galaxies of deep purple and silver that seemed to contain the light of dying stars. They were beautiful and terrifying, ancient beyond human comprehension, yet somehow achingly sad. The being's features were sharp and elegant, almost elven in their perfection, but the elongated canine teeth that extended past thin lips marked this as something far more dangerous than any fairy tale creature. Sarah had read the reports. The Terran Federation had been tracking these beings for months now. The Sanguinari, as xenobiologists had dubbed them. Blood drinkers. Ship destroyers. The nightmares that stalked the Outer Rim territories, leaving behind only drifting hulks and desiccated corpses. 14 colonies had gone silent. 47 research vessels had vanished without a trace. The few survivors who had escaped their encounters spoke of beings of impossible grace and terrible hunger, creatures that moved through space itself as easily as humans walked through air. This one wore what appeared to be armor, though it looked more like a second skin of dark metal that shifted and flowed with each movement. Intricate patterns were etched into the surface, glowing with the same purple light as those mesmerizing eyes. Long, silver hair flowed past her shoulders like liquid starlight, and when she moved, it was with a predator's fluid confidence. Sarah knew she should be reaching for the emergency beacon. She should be screaming into her communicator, alerting the fleet that humanity's greatest nightmare had found her alone in the depths of space. Instead, she found herself frozen, not entirely by fear, but by something she couldn't quite name. The being was terrifying, yes, but there was something else there, a loneliness that seemed to radiate from her very core. The Sanguinari tilted her head, studying Sarah with those impossible eyes. When she spoke, her voice was like music played on crystal instruments, beautiful and haunting. "Human," she said, the word carrying undertones of curiosity mixed with ancient disdain. "You are far from your kind's protected space. This sector belongs to the dark between stars now." Sarah's training kicked in, even as her hands trembled. Protocol demanded that she attempt communication with any new species, regardless of apparent hostility. The fact that this being could speak perfect standard English was already fascinating from a linguistic standpoint. "I'm Captain Sarah Chun of the Research Vessel Determination," she managed, her voice only slightly shaky. "We're conducting mineral surveys in this system. We didn't know this area was claimed." The creature's laugh was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, beautiful, but somehow hollow. "Claimed? Child, we do not claim territory, as your kind does. We simply are where we choose to be. And I choose to be here now, drawn by the warmth of your life, force pulsing through this cold metal shell you call a ship." Sarah felt her pulse quicken, and she realized the being could probably sense it, could probably smell her fear and the adrenaline flooding her system. But alongside the terror, something else was building in her chest, a strange kind of fascination. This was first contact with an entirely new form of life, possibly the most significant moment in human history since the invention of faster-than-light travel. "You're sanguinari," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "We've heard stories about your people." Stories, the being repeated, moving closer with steps that made no sound on the metal decking. "I imagine they are not pleasant stories. Your kind has a tendency to fear what it does not understand, and to destroy what it fears." "Some of them, yes," Sarah admitted. "But not all stories have to end in destruction. We've made peaceful contact with 17 different species in the past century. We've learned to coexist, to trade, to share knowledge." The sanguinari's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something that might have been surprise crossing those perfect features. "Peaceful contact. How remarkably naive. Tell me, Captain Sarah Chun, what makes you think I am interested in peace? What makes you believe I will not simply drain the life from your body and add your ship to the growing collection of derelicts that mark my passage through this galaxy?" Sarah's mouth went dry, but she forced herself to meet those swirling eyes. "Because you're still talking to me instead of killing me. Because there's something in your expression that suggests you're just as curious about humans as we are about you. And because—" She paused, struggling to put her instinct into words. "Because you seem lonely." The silence that followed was profound. The sanguinari went completely still, so motionless that Sarah wondered if she had somehow offended the being into a catatonic state. The only sound was the gentle hum of the ship's life support systems and Sarah's own rapid heartbeat. When the creature finally spoke, her voice had lost some of its musical quality, becoming more raw, more real. "Lonely," she repeated, as if testing the word. "An interesting observation from one whose death I hold in my hands." "My name is Sarah," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Not just Captain Chun or a human. Sarah. I'm 29 years old, I have a doctorate in xenogeology, and I've spent the last 3 years of my life studying mineral formations in dead systems because I believe that understanding the building blocks of planets can help us understand how life begins." She took a shaky breath. "I'm also absolutely terrified right now, but I'm more curious than afraid, which probably means I'm crazy." Something extraordinary happened then. The sanguinari's perfect predatory composure cracked just slightly, and Sarah saw something underneath that she had never expected to find: vulnerability. "Sarah," the being said slowly, as if tasting the name. "I am Zerthal 5th daughter of the Crimson Throne, Huntress of the Void, bearer of the Blood Crown." She paused, and when she continued, her voice was softer. "I am 437 years old by your reckoning, and I have not heard my name spoken by another living being in over a century." The admission hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to build. Sarah realized that she was witnessing something unprecedented, not just first contact between their species, but perhaps the first real conversation this ancient being had engaged in for longer than Sarah had been alive. 437 years, Sarah whispered. That's longer than human civilization has had spaceflight. You must have seen so much, learned so much. The things you could tell us about the galaxy, about the worlds you've visited." Zarathel moved closer still, close enough that Sarah could see the intricate patterns in her irises, like fractals made of light and shadow. "You speak as if knowledge were a gift rather than a burden, as if experience were something to be treasured rather than endured. Isn't it?" Sarah asked. "Every new thing we learn, every discovery we make, it's like adding a new color to the spectrum of reality. It makes everything richer, more complex, more beautiful." For a long moment, Zarathel simply stared at her, those ancient eyes searching Sarah's face as if looking for deception. "You truly believe that," she said finally. "Even now, facing certain death, you speak of beauty and discovery as if they were the most important things in existence." "Because they are," Sarah replied without hesitation. "Or at least, they're what make existence worthwhile. What's the point of living forever if you're not constantly amazed by the universe around you?" The question seemed to strike Zarathel like a physical blow. She stepped back, her perfect composure finally cracking entirely. "Living forever," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Child, you have no idea what forever means. You have no concept of the weight of centuries, of watching civilizations rise and fall like waves on a cosmic shore, of seeing everything you might once have cared about crumble to dust while you remain unchanging, eternal, alone." And suddenly, Sarah understood. This wasn't just about species differences or predator and prey dynamics. This was about pain so deep and old that it had crystallized into a kind of living death. Zarathel wasn't just a dangerous alien. She was a being trapped in her own immortality, isolated by her nature and her power. "You don't have to be alone," Sarah said quietly. "Not anymore. Not if you don't want to be." The words seemed to shock Zarathel more than anything else Sarah had said. The ancient being's eyes widened, and for a moment, the predator disappeared entirely, leaving behind something raw and achingly vulnerable. "You do not know what you offer," Zarathel said, her voice trembling. "You do not understand what I am, what I require to survive. I am death incarnate, child. I am the ending of life itself." "Maybe," Sarah said, taking a small step forward, her heart hammering, but her resolve growing stronger. "Or maybe you're just someone who's been alone for so long that you've forgotten how to be anything else. Maybe we both have something to learn here." The silence stretched between them again, but this time it felt different, charged with possibility instead of threat. Sarah could see the war playing out behind Zarathel's eyes, centuries of isolation and pain warring against something that might have been hope. Finally, Zarathel spoke, her voice barely audible. "Why do you not fear me?" Sarah considered the question seriously before answering. "I do fear you. You could kill me without effort, and we both know it. But fear doesn't mean I can't also see you. Really see you. And what I see is someone who's been carrying an incredible burden for far longer than anyone should have to carry anything. And what would you do with such a burden?" Zarathel asked. "How does one mortal human propose to address the loneliness of eternity?" Sarah smiled, the expression feeling strange on her face, given the circumstances, but somehow absolutely right. "One conversation at a time. One genuine connection at a time. One moment of actual understanding between two very different beings who are both just trying to figure out their place in this vast, complicated, beautiful universe." For the first time since materializing on Sarah's ship, Zarathel's expression softened completely. The predator's mask fell away, revealing something Sarah had never expected to find beneath it, genuine surprise at being offered exactly what she had thought was impossible. "One conversation," Zarathel repeated thoughtfully. "When was the last time I engaged in simple conversation?" She seemed to be asking herself more than Sarah. Not interrogation, not intimidation, not the formal exchanges of ancient protocol, but actual conversation between equals. "Equals?" Sarah asked, raising an eyebrow. "You're an immortal being with powers I can't even begin to understand. I'm a human with a geology degree and a tendency to say exactly the wrong thing at the worst possible moment. How exactly are we equals?" Zarathel's laugh this time was different, genuine, spontaneous, carrying none of the hollow quality from before. "Because you see me, Sarah Chun. You see past the legend and the fear to whatever remains of the person beneath. That is a rarer gift than any power I possess." And in that moment, as two beings from entirely different worlds stood facing each other in the quiet of deep space, something extraordinary began to happen. The first fragile threads of understanding started to weave themselves between predator and prey, between immortal and mortal, between two souls who had never expected to find recognition in each other's eyes. Neither of them knew it yet, but this conversation would reshape the galaxy itself. The conversation that followed would have seemed impossible to anyone who knew either species. Sarah found herself sitting cross-legged on the bridge floor, her tablet forgotten beside her, while Zarathel had gracefully settled into what could only be described as a floating meditation pose, her form hovering inches above the deck, plating with an ease that defied every law of physics Sarah understood. "Tell me about your people," Sarah said, her initial terror having evolved into genuine fascination. "What are the Sanguinari really like?" Not the stories our survivors tell, but the truth. Zarathel's expression grew distant, her galaxy-colored eyes focusing on something beyond the confines of the ship. "We were not always what we have become," she began, her voice taking on the cadence of someone recounting ancient history. "Once, long before your species learned to make fire, we were explorers, artists, philosophers. We built cities of crystal and light, composed symphonies from the songs of dying stars, painted with colors that exist only in the hearts of nebulae." Sarah leaned forward, captivated. "What changed?" "The hunger," Zarathel said simply. "It began as a gift, or so we thought. Enhanced longevity, increased strength and speed, the ability to sustain ourselves on the life force of other beings rather than crude matter. We believed we had transcended the limitations of mere flesh." Her laugh was bitter now. "We had no idea we were trading our souls for power." "But you're still you," Sarah protested. "You're still capable of thought, of feeling, of creating beauty. I can see it in how you move, how you speak. There's art in your very existence." Zarathel's gaze snapped back to Sarah, those swirling eyes wide with something that might have been shock. "Art? In me?" She gestured to herself with a fluid motion that was indeed beautiful in its precision. "Child, I'm a creature of predation and violence. I have ended more lives than your species has names for numbers. How can you see art in such a thing?" Sarah studied her for a moment, really looking at the being before her. The way Zarathel held herself was like a dancer perpetually ready for performance. Her movements had a rhythm to them, a music that spoke of eons spent perfecting grace. Even her speech patterns had a poetic quality that suggested a mind shaped by beauty, even if that mind had been forced to focus on darker things. "Because art isn't about the subject matter," Sarah said finally. "It's about intention, about the soul behind the creation. And despite everything you've been through, everything you've had to do to survive, you still move like someone who remembers what beauty means. You still speak like someone who once found joy in language itself." Zarathel went very still, and Sarah could see something working behind those ancient eyes. "You have an unusual perspective for a species we have categorized as prey animals." "Maybe that's exactly why I can see it," Sarah replied. "Sometimes it takes an outsider to recognize what someone has forgotten about themselves." She paused, then decided to take a risk. "Can I ask you something personal?" "More personal than discussing the fundamental nature of my existence," Zarathel asked with what Sarah was beginning to recognize as dry humor. "When did you last create something? Not destroy, not hunt, not survive. Actually create something new and beautiful just for the joy of creating it." The silence that followed was so profound that Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. Zarathel's expression cycled through several emotions too quickly for Sarah to identify them all, but she caught glimpses of pain, longing, and something that might have been fear. Zarathel began, then stopped. She tried again. "There was a time, perhaps 50 years ago, when I found myself in orbit around a dead star. The gravitational forces were creating the most extraordinary light patterns as matter spiraled into the collapse zone. I found myself arranging debris, creating formations that would interact with the light in specific ways." She paused, looking almost embarrassed. It served no purpose. There was no one to see it, but the patterns were beautiful, Sarah finished softly. "You were making art. I was wasting time," Zarathel said firmly, but Sarah could hear the defensiveness in her voice. "Indulging in pointless nostalgia for a nature I had long since abandoned." "Or maybe you were remembering who you really are underneath everything else," Sarah suggested. "Maybe your people didn't lose their souls when they gained their power. Maybe they just forgot how to access them." The look Zarathel gave her was complex beyond description. "You have no idea what you're suggesting. The implications of what you're saying would require me to reconsider everything I have believed about myself and my kind for centuries." "Would that be such a terrible thing?" Sarah asked gently. "Reconsidering old assumptions when new evidence presents itself is the foundation of all learning." "New evidence," Zarathel repeated thoughtfully. "And what evidence do you present, Captain Sarah-chun?" Sarah gestured between them. "This conversation. The fact that you're still here, still talking to me instead of doing what everyone expects Sanguinari to do. The fact that you remember creating beauty, even if you've convinced yourself it was meaningless. The fact that when I mentioned loneliness, you recognized it immediately. Zarathel was quiet for a long time, her gaze unfocused, as she seemed to be processing something internal. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. What if you're wrong? What if this conversation is simply an anomaly, a momentary deviation from my true nature? What if kindness and understanding are luxuries I can afford only because I plan to kill you anyway? The question should have terrified Sarah. Instead, she found herself smiling. Then, you would have done it already. You're powerful enough that there's no strategic advantage to this delay. If you intended to kill me, I'd already be dead. The fact that we're having this conversation means some part of you wants to be here, wants to connect with another thinking being. Or perhaps I'm simply toying with my food, Zarathel said, but there was no conviction in her voice. Are you? Sarah asked directly. Another long pause. Then, quietly, no. No, I do not believe I am. Sarah felt something relax in her chest that she hadn't even realized was tense. Then, we're making progress. Progress toward what? Zarathel asked. What do you imagine the end point of this interaction to be? Even if you're correct about my nature, even if I am more than the monster I've become, what then? I am still what I am. I still require life force to survive. I am still immortal while you are gloriously, tragically temporary. It was Sarah's turn to be quiet as she considered the question. It was true that they were fundamentally different beings with apparently incompatible life cycles and needs. But something in her refused to accept that incompatibility was insurmountable. I don't know what the end point is, she said honestly. But I know that this conversation, right here, right now, is already more meaningful than most interactions I have in a given year. You're fascinating, Zarathel, not just as an alien species to be studied, but as a person with depths and complexities and experiences unlike anything I could have imagined. If this conversation is all we get, it's still been worthwhile. Worthwhile, Zarathel mused. Another concept I had forgotten. When did I stop evaluating experiences in terms of their intrinsic worth rather than their utility for survival? Probably around the same time survival became your primary concern, Sarah said. It's hard to think about beauty and meaning when you're focused on just making it through another day. But you've survived, Zarathel. You've endured for centuries. Maybe now you can start thinking about living instead of just surviving. Something extraordinary happened then. Zarathel's form, which had been hovering in perfect stillness, began to settle until she was actually sitting on the deck across from Sarah. The gesture seemed symbolic somehow, an ancient being literally coming down to human level for the sake of connection. Living, Zarathel repeated. I'm not certain I remember how. Then, maybe we can figure out together, Sarah said. I may not have your experience or your abilities, but I do have enthusiasm for discovery. And you? She paused, studying the being across from her. You have perspectives and knowledge that could revolutionize how we understand existence itself. And what makes you think your people would be interested in perspectives from someone they view as a monster? Zarathel asked. Sarah's answer was immediate and certain. Because the best way to stop seeing someone as a monster is to start seeing them as a person. And you, Zarathel and Alexandra, are definitely a person. A complicated, ancient, beautiful person with stories to tell and art to create and connections to make. The word beautiful seemed to hit Zarathel like a physical force. She actually recoiled slightly, her eyes widening. Beautiful? You call me beautiful? Sarah realized her mistake immediately. In her growing comfort with the conversation, she had spoken without thinking, letting her genuine impression slip out unfiltered. But, looking at Zarathel's reaction, she decided honesty was still the best path forward. Yes, she said simply. You are beautiful. Not in a human way, obviously, but in a way that's entirely your own. There's elegance in how you move, music in how you speak, art in how you exist. Even your sadness is beautiful. It shows depth and capacity for feeling that makes you more real, more complete. Zarathel's expression was going through rapid changes again, cycling through disbelief, confusion, and something that looked almost like pain. No one has called me beautiful, Anne. She stopped, her voice catching. In so long that I had forgotten what the word meant when applied to anything other than destruction or decay. Then They were all missing something important, Sarah said firmly. Beauty doesn't disappear just because no one's around to acknowledge it. It doesn't stop existing because people are too frightened or too prejudiced to see it. For a moment, Sarah thought Zarathel might actually cry, though she wasn't sure if beings like the Sanguinari were capable of tears. The ancient creature's composure was completely shattered, leaving behind something raw and vulnerable that was almost painful to witness. "You see me," Zarathel whispered. "Not what I am supposed to be, not what I've been forced to become, but me. How is that possible?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "Maybe because I'm not looking with the eyes of someone who's already decided what you are. Maybe because I'm curious instead of judgmental. Or maybe," she smiled slightly, "maybe because I've always been better at seeing potential than dwelling on past mistakes." "Potential," Zarathel said, as if testing another forgotten word. "The possibility of becoming something other than what one currently is." "Exactly. And you have so much potential, Zarathel. Centuries of experience, cosmic levels of knowledge, abilities that could be used to create instead of destroy. You could be anything you wanted to be. And what if what I want to be is something your people would find unacceptable?" Zarathel asked. "What if my nature truly is fundamentally incompatible with peaceful coexistence?" Sarah met her gaze steadily. "Then we'll figure out how to make it compatible. Humans are good at that, finding ways to make impossible things work through creativity and stubbornness and willingness to try new approaches." "You would risk your entire species on such optimism?" Zarathel asked, incredulous. "I would risk anything for the chance to prove that understanding is stronger than fear," Sarah replied without hesitation. "That connection is more powerful than isolation. That two very different beings can find common ground if they're willing to look for it." The conviction in Sarah's voice seemed to affect Zarathel profoundly. The ancient being studied her for a long moment, those galaxy-colored eyes searching Sarah's face as if looking for deception and finding only sincerity. "You are either the bravest person I have ever encountered," Zarathel said finally, "or the most foolishly naive. Why can't I be both?" Sarah asked with a grin. "Some of the best discoveries in human history have been made by people who were too naive to know something was impossible." And for the second time since materializing on Sarah's ship, Zarathel laughed. Not the hollow, crystalline sound from before, but something warmer, more genuine, touched with real amusement and perhaps even affection. "You are remarkable, Sarah Chun," Zarathel said. "Absolutely remarkable." The compliment sent warmth flooding through Sarah's chest, partly because it came from such an extraordinary being, but mostly because she could hear the authentic appreciation in Zarathel's voice. This wasn't polite conversation anymore. This was real connection forming between two individuals who had found something unexpected in each other. Neither of them realized that their conversation was being monitored, that automated systems on Sarah's ship were recording everything and preparing to transmit the data to fleet headquarters of the next scheduled communication window. Neither of them knew that their meeting was about to spark a revolution that would change the relationship between their species forever. For now, there was only the growing understanding between an immortal artist who had forgotten how to create and a mortal scientist who had never stopped believing in the possibility of beauty. The hours that followed blurred together in a way that Sarah had never experienced before. Time seemed to lose its meaning as she and Zarathel talked, their conversation ranging from the philosophical to the practical, from the cosmic to the deeply personal. Sarah learned that the Sanguinari had once been great teachers and healers, that their enhanced abilities had originally been used to extend life rather than consume it. Zarathel learned that humans dreamed of stars long before they could reach them, that they created art and music and literature about things they had never seen simply because they could imagine them. "Your species," Zarathel said during one of their discussions, "possesses something that mine lost long ago. Hope. Genuine, irrational, persistent hope that things can always be better than they are. Is that really so unusual?" Sarah asked. "Surely other species have hope." Zarathel shook her head, her silver hair catching the light in ways that reminded Sarah of solar flares. "Hope, yes, but not like humans have it. Your hope is aggressive, active. When you encounter a problem, your first instinct is to solve it. When you find something broken, you immediately begin planning how to fix it. When you meet someone different from yourselves, you look for ways to build bridges rather than walls. Not always, Sarah said honestly. We've made our share of mistakes. We've let fear drive us to some pretty terrible decisions over the centuries. But you learn from those mistakes, Zarathel pointed out. You adapt. You grow. My people, we became trapped in our nature. We accepted that we were predators and stopped trying to be anything else. Sarah leaned forward, struck by an idea. What if you didn't have to be? What if there were other ways to sustain yourselves? Zarathel's expression became carefully neutral. Explain. You said you require life force to survive, Sarah said, her mind racing with possibilities. But does it have to come from killing? Could you sustain yourself on smaller amounts taken from willing donors? Like how humans donate blood, taking only what could be safely spared. The silence that followed was so complete that Sarah could hear the gentle hum of the ship's air recyclers. Zarathel stared at her with an expression of such profound shock that Sarah wondered if she had somehow said something offensive. Willing donors, Zarathel repeated slowly. You would suggest that beings voluntarily offer their life force to sustain my existence? Why not? Sarah asked. If the amount needed for your survival could be taken safely, and if the process wasn't harmful to the donor, why wouldn't there be people willing to help? Humans have been known to risk their lives for far less important causes. Because Zarathel struggled for words. Because we are monsters. Because the very idea of a human willingly approaching a sanguinary for any reason other than misguided bravery or suicidal intent is absurd. Is it? Sarah challenged. You're not a monster to me. You're a person who's been dealt a difficult hand and made the best choices you could with the options available. But what if there were better options? Zarathel's form flickered slightly, her perfect stillness disturbed by what Sarah was beginning to recognize as deep emotional turmoil. You cannot simply redefine the fundamental nature of predator-prey relationships with optimistic speculation. Watch me, Sarah said with a grin. Besides, it's not optimistic speculation. It's scientific hypothesis formation. We identify a problem, theorize potential solutions, and then test those theories. That's how humans have solved every major challenge we've ever faced. And what if your theory proves incorrect? What if the fundamental requirements of my existence truly are incompatible with peaceful coexistence? Sarah considered this seriously. Then we'll find another approach. And if that doesn't work, we'll find another one after that. Humans are incredibly stubborn when we're trying to solve problems we care about. And you care about this? Zarathel asked quietly. About finding a solution that would allow my people to exist without destroying yours. I care about you, Sarah said simply. Not just as a representative of your species, but as an individual who deserves the chance to live instead of just surviving. You're brilliant, Zarathel. You're ancient and wise and artistic and capable of genuine emotion. The universe is a richer place with you in it, and I refuse to accept that the only options are isolation or destruction. The impact of these words on Zarathel was visible and immediate. The ancient being actually trembled, her perfect composure finally cracking completely. Sarah, she whispered, her voice rough with emotion. You cannot possibly understand what you have just said to someone who has considered herself irredeemably lost for centuries. Then, let me help you understand that you're not lost, Sarah replied firmly. You're just far from home, and home is wherever you can be yourself without fear or shame or isolation. What happened next would have seemed impossible to anyone familiar with sanguinary physiology. Zarathel, the immortal predator, the nightmare of the Outer Rim, began to cry. The tears that fell from those galaxy-colored eyes were like liquid starlight, beautiful and heartbreaking and utterly real. Sarah's instinct was to offer comfort, but she wasn't sure how to approach a being whose very nature was alien to her. Instead, she simply remained present, offering silent support while Zarathel processed emotions that had apparently been buried for centuries. I had forgotten, Zarathel said finally, her voice thick with tears. I had forgotten what it felt like to be seen as anything other than a threat, to be spoken to as though my thoughts and feelings mattered. To be offered kindness without expectation of anything in return. Your thoughts and feelings do matter, Sarah said gently. They matter because you matter. Not as a member of your species or as a representative of some larger group, but as yourself, as Zarathel. The sound of her own name spoken with such genuine warmth seemed to affect Zarathel as much as anything else. She wiped the starlight tears from her cheeks with a gesture that was achingly human despite her alien nature. What happens now, she asked. Even if everything you suggest were possible, even if my people could find ways to coexist peacefully with yours, what happens to this moment? What happens to us? Sarah felt her heart skip at the word us. Somewhere during their conversation, she had stopped thinking of this as first contact with an alien species and started thinking of it as a meeting between two individuals who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. I don't know, she admitted, but I'd like to find out. Would you be willing to come with me? To meet other humans, to explore the possibilities we've been discussing? Zarathel's eyes widened. You're inviting me into human space? After everything your people believe about the Sanguinari? I'm inviting you to take a chance on us the same way I'm asking you to take a chance on yourself, Sarah replied. Yes, it's risky. Yes, there will be people who react with fear or hostility. But there will also be people who react with curiosity and wonder and hope. Scientists who want to learn about your abilities, artists who want to understand your aesthetic perspectives, philosophers who want to explore the implications of immortal consciousness. And if the negative reactions outweigh the positive ones, then we'll deal with that when it happens, Sarah said. But I truly believe that once people get to know you the way I'm getting to know you, they'll see what I see. Someone worth knowing, worth understanding, worth caring about. Zarathel was quiet for a long time, her expression cycling through complex emotions. Sarah could see the hope warring with centuries of learned caution, the desire for connection fighting against the fear of rejection or worse. There would need to be protocols, Zarathel said finally. Safeguards. I will not risk harming innocents, no matter how optimistic your species' intentions. Of course, Sarah agreed immediately. We'll set up meetings in controlled environments with volunteers who understand the potential risks. Medical teams on standby, security protocols, whatever makes everyone feel safe. You speak as if this were already decided, Zarathel observed. Isn't it? Sarah asked. We've already proven that meaningful communication is possible between our species. We've already demonstrated that understanding can overcome fear when people are willing to try. The only question now is whether we're brave enough to see how far this can go. Zarathel smiled then, the expression transforming her entire face from something coldly beautiful to something warmly radiant. Brave enough, she repeated. Yes, I believe I might be brave enough for that. Sarah felt a surge of excitement unlike anything she had ever experienced. They were about to attempt something unprecedented in galactic history. Not just peaceful first contact, but genuine friendship between species that had been categorized as natural enemies. There's something I should tell you, she said suddenly, realizing that in her excitement, she had overlooked a crucial detail. My ship's systems have been recording our conversation. Standard protocol for first contact situations. The data will be transmitted to fleet headquarters at the next communication window. She expected Zarathel to be angry or alarmed, but the ancient being simply nodded. Good. Let them hear what we have discussed. Let them know that their assumptions about my people may require revision. You're not concerned about the reaction? I am terrified, Zarathel admitted with characteristic honesty. But terror and excitement often feel remarkably similar. And if we're to move forward with this experiment in interspecies cooperation, transparency will be essential from the beginning. Sarah smiled, struck again by how thoughtful and genuinely wise this being was. You're right. No hidden agendas, no secret intentions. Just two people who found something unexpected in each other and want to see if that something can grow into something larger. Two people, Zarathel mused. I like that. Not human and sanguinary, not predator and prey, not immortal and mortal. Just two people who happened to meet in the vast darkness of space and discovered they enjoyed talking to each other. More than enjoyed, Sarah corrected softly. I've learned more about myself in these few hours than I have in years of studying dead rocks. You've challenged my assumptions, expanded my perspective, made me think about existence in ways I never considered before. You have given me something I thought was lost forever, Zarathel replied. Hope, not just for my own future, but for the possibility that isolation and predation are not the only options available to my kind. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing the magnitude of what they were contemplating. Then, Sarah's communications system chimed, indicating an incoming transmission from Fleet Headquarters. The outside world was about to intrude on their private revolution. Sarah, Zarathel said urgently, before you answer that transmission, I need you to know something. Whatever happens next, whatever the reaction from your people or mine, this conversation has been the most meaningful experience I have had in centuries. You have reminded me that I am more than the sum of my darker necessities. That is a gift beyond price. The gift goes both ways, Sarah assured her. You've shown me that the universe is even more wonderful and complex than I imagined. That understanding and connection are possible even in the most unlikely circumstances. The communication system chimed again, more insistently. Sarah looked at Zarathel, seeing her own mixture of excitement and apprehension reflected in those swirling galaxy eyes. Ready to change the world? Sarah asked. Ready to try, Zarathel replied. Sarah reached for the communication controls, but paused just before activating them. One more thing, she said. Whatever happens, we're in this together now. Allies, friends, partners in the most ambitious peaceful contact attempt in galactic history. Friends, Zarathel repeated, the word carrying the weight of centuries of isolation finally coming to an end. Yes, I would very much like to be your friend, Sarah Chun. And with that declaration hanging between them like a promise, Sarah opened the channel that would announce to the galaxy that everything they thought they knew about the Sanguinari was about to change forever. The transmission from Fleet Headquarters came through with the kind of urgent priority coding that Sarah had only seen during genuine emergencies. Admiral Rebecca Martinez's face filled the communication screen, her expression grim with the weight of command decisions that could affect the fate of humanity. Captain Chun, the Admiral said without preamble, our sensors detected an energy signature consistent with Sanguinari presence in your vicinity approximately 6 hours ago. Please confirm your status immediately. Sarah glanced at Zarathel, who had moved to position herself just outside the camera's range but still visible to Sarah. The ancient being nodded slightly, giving her permission to proceed with whatever she thought best. Admiral Martinez, Sarah replied formally, I can confirm that I am alive and unharmed. I can also confirm that I have made contact with a member of the Sanguinari species. The Admiral's face went through several rapid changes of expression before settling on professional caution. Captain, please clarify. Are you currently under duress? Are you being coerced into this communication? No, ma'am. I am speaking freely and of my own volition. The individual I've encountered has shown no hostility toward me. We have been engaged in extended dialogue for several hours. Dialogue, Admiral Martinez repeated flatly. With a Sanguinari. Yes, ma'am. Her name is Zarathel Nixandra, and I believe she may be interested in opening formal diplomatic communications with our government. The silence that followed was so long that Sarah began to wonder if the transmission had been cut. Finally, Admiral Martinez spoke, her voice carefully controlled. Captain Chun, I need you to understand the magnitude of what you're claiming. The Sanguinari have been responsible for the destruction of 14 colonies and over 40 research vessels. They are classified as an extreme threat to human life. With respect, Admiral, those classifications may need to be revisited based on new information. I've learned that the attacks attributed to the Sanguinari may not represent the actions or intentions of the species as a whole. Sarah heard Zarathel make a small sound that might have been surprise. She realized that they hadn't actually discussed the specifics of the attacks on human settlements, and she was making assumptions about Zarathel's involvement or knowledge of them. New information, Admiral Martinez said skeptically. From a single individual of a species we know almost nothing about. Yes, ma'am, but significant information nonetheless. Admiral, I request permission to escort my guest to the nearest diplomatic facility for formal first contact protocols. Your guest. The Admiral's tone suggested she was struggling to process the concept. Captain, even if we accept your assessment of this individual's peaceful intentions, Bringing a sanguinari into inhabited space would create a panic that could destabilize several systems. Then, we'll need to be careful about how we handle the announcement, Sarah replied. But, Admiral, this is potentially the most important diplomatic opportunity in human history. We have a chance to establish peaceful relations with a species we've only known as an enemy. We can't let fear prevent us from exploring that possibility. Captain Chun, I'm going to ask you directly. Do you believe you're thinking clearly? Is it possible that you have been influenced by some form of mental manipulation? Sarah had expected the question, but it still stung. Admiral, I understand your concern, but my thinking has never been clearer. I am making this recommendation based on hours of direct observation and interaction. This individual is capable of complex reasoning, demonstrates emotional depth and ethical considerations, and has expressed genuine interest in peaceful coexistence. And you're willing to stake your career and potentially human lives on that assessment. I'm willing to stake my career on following proper first contact protocols with a sentient species that has demonstrated peaceful intent, Sarah replied firmly. As for human lives, I believe the greater risk lies in continuing to treat the sanguinari as irredeemable enemies when they might be potential allies. Admiral Martinez was quiet for another long moment. Sarah could almost see the command calculations happening behind the older woman's eyes, weighing political consequences against strategic opportunities, balancing caution against the possibility of historic breakthrough. Captain, I need to speak with this individual directly, the Admiral said finally. Sarah looked to Zarathel, who moved into camera range with fluid grace. The effect on Admiral Martinez was immediate and visible. Her professional composure cracked slightly as she found herself face to face with one of humanity's nightmares. Admiral Martinez, Zarathel said, her musical voice carrying clearly through the communication system, I am honored to address you. Captain Chun has spoken to the protocols and courtesies that govern formal diplomatic contact among your people. I wish to express my respect for these traditions and my desire to approach this situation with the gravity it deserves. The Admiral stared for several seconds before finding her voice. You're really here. You're actually communicating with us. I am, Admiral, and I wish to make clear that Captain Chin's assessment of my intentions is entirely accurate. I have no desire for conflict with humanity. Indeed, I hope that this contact might lead to greater understanding between our species. Greater understanding, Admiral Martinez repeated, her tone carefully neutral. What exactly are you proposing? I am proposing that the assumptions both our species have made about each other may be incomplete or incorrect, Zarathel replied. I am proposing that dialogue may be more productive than warfare. I am proposing that isolation has served neither of our peoples well. Sarah watched the Admiral process this, seeing the moment when military training warred with diplomatic possibility. And what assurances can you offer that this isn't some elaborate deception? How do we know you're not simply a more sophisticated threat than we previously understood? Zarathel's expression remained calm and dignified. You do not know, Admiral. You cannot know with certainty any more than I can guarantee your peaceful intentions toward me. Trust must begin somewhere, with someone willing to extend it despite uncertainty. Captain Chin chose to extend that trust to me. I am now extending it to your people through you. Trust, Admiral Martinez mused. Between natural enemies. Perhaps we are not as natural enemies as we have believed, Zarathel suggested. Perhaps enmity is a choice rather than an inevitability. Sarah could see the moment when Admiral Martinez made her decision. The older woman's shoulders straightened, and her expression shifted from cautious skepticism to careful professionalism. Very well. I'm authorizing Captain Chun to escort you to Deep Space Station Harmony for formal first contact proceedings. However, there will be strict protocols in place for the safety of all involved. I would expect no less, Zarathel replied graciously. I am prepared to accept whatever restrictions you deem necessary to ensure the comfort and safety of your people. The proceedings will be conducted in a secure facility with full recording for later analysis by our xenobiology and diplomatic teams. There will be armed security present, though I hope their presence will prove unnecessary. Understood, Admiral. I appreciate your willingness to proceed despite your understandable caution. Admiral Martinez nodded curtly. Captain Chun, You will maintain constant communication during transit. Any deviation from approved flight paths or any sign of aggressive action will result in immediate military intervention. Acknowledged, Admiral, Sarah replied. We'll begin our approach to Station Harmony immediately. Captain, the Admiral added, her tone softening slightly. What you're attempting here, it could change everything. But if you're wrong about this individual's intentions, then I'll face the consequences, Sarah said simply. But, Admiral, I'm not wrong. I know that with the same certainty I know anything else about the universe. After the transmission ended, Sarah found herself alone with Zarathel again, but the atmosphere felt different now. The private conversation between two individuals had become something larger and more complex, the opening movements of a diplomatic dance that could reshape galactic politics. Are you having second thoughts? Zarathel asked quietly. About you? Never, Sarah replied immediately. About the wisdom of announcing our friendship to the entire galaxy before we'd really had time to figure out what it means? Maybe a little. Zarathel laughed, the sound carrying less tension than it had earlier. I confess to similar feelings. It has been centuries since I've had to consider how my actions might affect others. The prospect is both terrifying and oddly exhilarating. We'll figure it out as we go, Sarah said, beginning her pre-flight preparations. That's what humans do best, improvise solutions to impossible problems. And what do the Sanguinari do best? Zarathel asked. Sarah considered the question as she ran through her navigation calculations. From what I've seen, endure. Survive impossible circumstances while retaining the capacity for growth and change. Those are pretty valuable skills for this kind of undertaking. As the ship began its journey towards Station Harmony, both Sarah and Zarathel were quiet, lost in their own thoughts about what lay ahead. Neither of them could predict the reception they would receive, the challenges they would face, or the consequences their actions might have for billions of lives across the galaxy. What they did know was that they had found something rare and valuable in each other, genuine understanding across species lines, proof that communication and empathy could bridge even the widest gaps of fear and misunderstanding. Whatever happened next, that discovery would endure. Sarah, Zarathel said as they entered hyperspace, I want you to know that regardless of how this diplomatic contact proceeds, you have already given me something I'd thought lost forever. A reason to hope that tomorrow might be different than yesterday. You've given me something too, Sarah replied. The knowledge that the universe is even more wonderful and full of possibility than I imagined. That there are friends waiting to be made in the most unexpected places. Behind them, automated systems sent word of their approach to Station Harmony. Ahead of them, history waited to be made. And between them, the friendship that had started with a panicked compliment to an ancient predator continued to grow into something that would change two civilizations forever. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see what would happen when a human and a Sanguinari walked into a diplomatic meeting as allies rather than enemies. The answer would surprise everyone involved, including Sarah and Zarathel themselves. Deep Space Station Harmony had been designed for exactly this type of situation, though its architects had never imagined it would be used to host humanity's most feared enemy. The station hung in a neutral zone between human space and the unexplored territories, its gleaming superstructure a testament to human engineering and diplomatic optimism. As Sarah's ship approached the docking bay, she could see the unprecedented level of activity surrounding their arrival. Dozens of vessels from across the Federation, representatives from every major human colony, and enough security ships to handle a small war. Having second thoughts about the wisdom of bringing me here? Zarathel asked, observing the massive security presence through the viewport. Not about bringing you, Sarah replied, but maybe about doing it quite so publicly. This has turned into the biggest diplomatic event in human history. Good, Zarathel said, surprising her. If we are to succeed in changing the relationship between our peoples, we cannot do it quietly. The galaxy must witness what is possible when beings choose understanding over fear. The docking process was handled with military precision, and within minutes they were being escorted through the station's corridors by a security detail that was trying very hard to appear professional rather than terrified. Sarah could see the wide eyes and careful movements of the guards, the way they kept their weapons ready, but not quite aimed. They were prepared for anything except what they were actually encountering. A sanguinari who walked peacefully beside a human, engaging in quiet conversation about the station's architecture. The main diplomatic hall had been hastily reconfigured for the occasion. High-ranking officials from across human space were present, either in person or via holographic projection. Sarah recognized Admiral Martinez, President Chun of the Earth Federation, Ambassador Williams from the Colonial Council, and dozens of other faces she had only seen in news broadcasts. At the center of the room, 2 chairs had been placed facing the assembled dignitaries. Sarah took her seat, and, after a moment's hesitation, Zarathel gracefully settled into hers. The absolute silence that followed was profound. Hundreds of the galaxy's most powerful humans staring at one of the beings they had believed represented an existential threat to their species. President Chun was the first to speak, her voice carrying the weight of representing billions of lives. I am President Elena Chun of the Earth Federation. On behalf of humanity, I welcome you to this diplomatic gathering. Though I confess, we are unsure of the proper protocols for this situation. Zarathel rose smoothly from her chair and executed what could only be described as a formal bow, though it was unlike any human gesture. I am Zarathel Nixindra, 5th daughter of the Crimson Throne. I speak only for myself in this moment, but I hope that my words might open dialogue between our peoples. I thank you for your willingness to meet with someone your species has known only as an enemy. You acknowledge that there has been hostility between our species. Admiral Martinez interjected. 14 colonies destroyed, thousands of lives lost. How do you address these acts of aggression? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Sarah felt her heart clench. This was the moment that would determine whether their friendship could survive the harsh realities of interspecies politics. Zarathel was quiet for a long moment, her expression grave. Admiral Martinez, I cannot speak to the specific incidents you reference, as I was not involved in them. But I can speak to the circumstances that led to such tragedies, and I can offer perspectives that may help prevent future conflicts. Please explain, President Chun said. My people, Zarathel began, have been isolated for centuries, cut off from meaningful contact with other species by our nature and our needs. When we encounter other beings in space, it is often because we are hunting, seeking sustenance. In such situations, communication is not typically a priority. You're describing predation, not diplomatic contact, Ambassador Williams observed. Precisely, Zarathel agreed. We have approached other species as predators approach prey because we believe that was our only option. But Captain Chun has shown me that this assumption may be incorrect. She has demonstrated that meaningful dialogue is possible, that understanding can develop between beings with very different needs and perspectives. Sarah felt a surge of pride at being referenced, but she also recognized the crucial moment this represented. If I may, she said, I'd like to explain what we've discovered about potential alternatives to predatory contact. President Chin nodded. Please, Captain. Sarah stood, addressing the assembly with the confidence that came from genuine conviction. During our extended dialogue, we explored the possibility that the sanguinari's need for life force might be met through voluntary donation rather than predation. Much like humans donate blood for medical purposes, it might be possible for individuals to safely share life force with sanguinari partners. The murmur that ran through the assembly was immediate and intense. Sarah could see expressions ranging from fascination to horror, curiosity to disgust. You're suggesting that humans voluntarily submit to energy vampires, Admiral Martinez said bluntly. I'm suggesting that humans and sanguinari work together to find mutually beneficial solutions to a biological necessity, Sarah corrected. We've overcome seemingly impossible biological incompatibilities before through scientific research and creative problem solving. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the Federation's chief xenobiologist, leaned forward in her seat. From a scientific standpoint, this proposal raises fascinating questions. If the sanguinari's nutritional requirements could be met through non-lethal means, it would fundamentally change the dynamic between our species. The question, President Chun said carefully, is whether such a solution is actually feasible and whether there would be humans willing to participate in such an arrangement. I would, Sarah said immediately. Volunteer, I mean. If it would help establish peaceful relations between our species, I would be willing to participate in carefully monitored trials. The reaction to this declaration was immediate and intense. Several officials began speaking at once, their voices mixing into a cacophony of concern, protest, and debate. But through it all, Sarah heard one voice clearly. "You would risk your own life force to help me?" Zarathel asked, her musical voice cutting through the noise. The sincerity and wonder in her tone quieted the assembly. "I would risk it to help you, yes," Sarah replied, meeting those galaxy-colored eyes. "But more than that, I would risk it to prove that our species can find ways to coexist that don't require either of us to compromise our fundamental nature." The fundamental nature of the Sanguinari is predation, Ambassador Williams pointed out. "How do you propose to change something so basic?" "We don't change their nature," Sarah said, turning to address the ambassador directly. "We provide them with options that allow them to express their nature in ways that don't require the destruction of other sentient beings. Humans have appetites and drives that could be destructive if left unchecked, but we've learned to channel them constructively. We can help the Sanguinari do the same." Zarathel stood slowly, drawing every eye in the room. "What Captain Shun suggests is nothing less than a complete reimagining of how my people exist in this galaxy. For centuries, we have accepted isolation as the price of survival. We have believed that our needs made us incompatible with other forms of life." She paused, looking around the assembly with those ancient, wise eyes. "But perhaps we've been trapped not by our nature, but by our assumptions about what that nature requires. Perhaps there are possibilities we have never considered because we have never had the opportunity for genuine dialogue with other species." President Chun was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing the implications of what was being proposed. "This is unprecedented," she said finally. "The establishment of symbiotic relationships between predator and prey species flies in the face of everything we understand about interspecies dynamics." "Which is exactly why it might work," Dr. Harper interjected excitedly. "Unprecedented doesn't mean impossible. Some of our greatest achievements have come from attempting things that were previously thought impossible. And some of our greatest disasters," Admiral Martinez countered. "We're talking about fundamentally altering human biology and social structures to accommodate beings that have been our enemies." "With respect, Admiral," Zarathel said, "we have not been your enemies. We have been strangers operating under incompatible assumptions about survival and coexistence. True enemies choose hostility even when peaceful alternatives are available. I am here today precisely because I wish to explore those peaceful alternatives." The debate that followed lasted for hours, with representatives arguing about everything from the practical implementation of symbiotic relationships to the political implications of formal diplomatic recognition of the Sanguinari. But gradually, a consensus began to emerge. Not necessarily agreement, but recognition that the potential benefits of peaceful contact outweighed the risks of continued hostility. "Very well," President Chun said finally, calling for quiet. "I propose that we establish a formal research and diplomatic protocol to explore the possibilities that have been raised today. Dr. Harper will head a scientific team to investigate the biological feasibility of non-lethal life force sharing. Ambassador Williams will work on the diplomatic framework for interspecies cooperation, and Captain Chun will serve as our primary liaison with Sanguinari representatives." "And Zarathel?" Sarah asked. "What will her role be in this process?" President Chun looked to the ancient being, who had remained seated quietly during the debate. "That depends on what she is willing to commit to." Zarathel rose gracefully, her expression serious but hopeful. "I commit to serving as translator and intermediary between our species. I commit to participating in whatever scientific studies you deem necessary to ensure the safety of potential volunteers. And I commit to using whatever influence I possess among my people to encourage them to consider alternatives to predation." "And in return?" Admiral Martinez asked. "In return, I ask only for the opportunity to prove that peaceful coexistence is possible," Zarathel replied. "And for the friendship that Captain Chun has shown me to serve as a model for what our peoples might achieve together." President Chun nodded slowly. I believe we can agree to those terms, though I suspect this will be the beginning of a very long and complex process. All the best things are, Sarah said with a smile. 3 months later, Sarah stood on the observation deck of a newly established joint research station, watching as a group of human volunteers worked alongside sanguinary researchers to perfect the life force sharing process that would revolutionize both civilizations. The early trials had been more successful than anyone had dared hope, proving that careful, consensual sharing not only met the sanguinaries' nutritional needs, but actually provided health benefits to human participants. Zarathel approached from behind, her footsteps silent as always. "Remarkable," she said, joining Sarah at the viewport. 6 months ago, if someone had told me I would be watching humans and sanguinari working together as equals, I would have considered them delusional. 6 months ago, if someone had told me I'd be best friends with a vampire, I would have checked them into psychiatric care, Sarah replied with a laugh. Amazing what a simple compliment can accomplish. A compliment, genuine curiosity, and the courage to see past surface assumptions to the person beneath, Zarathel corrected. "You gave me the greatest gift possible, Sarah Chun. You gave me hope. You gave me something pretty valuable too," Sarah said. "The knowledge that the universe is full of incredible people just waiting to be understood. That friendship and understanding are possible even in the most unlikely circumstances." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching as two species that had once been enemies work side by side to build something unprecedented, a truly integrated galactic community based on mutual respect and cooperation rather than fear and isolation. "What do you think happens next?" Zarathel asked. "I like that plan." And as they watched the future being built through cooperation and understanding, both Sarah and Zarathel knew that their friendship had become something larger than either of them had imagined. Proof that the most powerful force in the universe wasn't fear or hatred or isolation, but the simple willingness to see another being's worth and to offer them the gift of genuine connection. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly as it should be.